Nessie watching in the same spot. However, when they went away, passers have claimed to notice something in the lock, which brings me to the next curious thing. Yes, the creature's curiosity. It is often associated with the more gregarious mammalian traits. However, consider the great white shark. It shows a lot more curiosity to shark cages than other sharks, and they have been found to be warm-blooded. Consider that Nessie, by most accounts, appears to be no supermodel. In fact, quite the contrary, and yet she sticks her head up out of the water, clearly dodging cameras. Therefore, like orcas, she seems to have her own way of spying on things. Orcas, of course, spy hop. There is also the case of Dr. Robert Rines and his 1970s expeditions using strobe cameras. On one occasion, Nessie seems to have bumped the underwater camera rig. I feel sure she did not accidentally do that. Bit like great whites. Tested it. At this point, it should be stressed that I am not inferring Nessie is the danger that great whites have been found to be to swimmers. No, quite the contrary. Okay, so it's fair to say that Nessie has a level of curiosity. So why do us Nessie hunters find it hard getting her interested in responding? I will tell you why. Because they do not recognize her intelligence. She is not of average intel. I will mention the Lake Champlain Baudet film. The whole film was not released, but the bit that was depicts a long neck passing under the boat and looking back up from under the water at the men on board the boat. Once again, orcas do that as well. A person who has seen the entire film claims, and I mean claims, it's a huge long-necked turtle. Once again, I believe that lake has more than one type of cryptid within its eerie waters. So back to Nessie. They say she sleeps in caves in the sides of the locks. I have seen many vids and attempts on the lock, but no one has shown us a cave nor sent an ROV into one. But maybe she does sleep in caves. Sonar has more than once caught a large object, either just floating or laying still at the bottom, yet on a second sweep of sonar it's vanished. So, does Nessie have a cloak of invisibility? Actually, maybe she does. Do you know there is a deep layer of silt at the bed of the lock? Does Nessie have the ability to dive into the silt to conceal herself from the irritation of a sonar beam? A beam that she finds predatory and thus evades it, and us. So I just want to back it up a bit here. Just a bit, like the 1970s. You know, there was a great series called Arthur C. Clarke's Mysterious World. It was an episode about lake monsters, for want of a better word. Okay, so one section showed us real footage of a sonar screen. The testimony was this: the skipper and crew had been night Nessie watching using their sonar. The sonar showed two objects that the skipper said was a large 40-foot object, and in its shadow was a 20-foot object. Both were clearly dodging the sonar beam, and he assumed the 20-footer to be an infant. Now, once again, orcas swim with their infants, and a flushing toilet on board had them disappear suddenly. On the subject of the young of these creatures, considering that the long-necked and humped-back versions from lakes around the world are probably of the same phylum, then it's worth mentioning the observation of a lady in South America whose window overlooked the lake, which had supposed creatures in them, and saw one close up. But on this occasion, they were on an island in the lake. She said an adult, which seemed to be the mother, was ashore and watching the two juveniles play in the water. Yes, play. After a while, they all swam off. But hold on, did she say playing? Heck, never seen crocs, nor gators, nor lizards playing. Once again, mammalian traits. So what should we make of it? Well, for a start, we should question traditional held ideas of what is or is not possible. So-called experts say it cannot be this, because, or it cannot be that, because, or it just cannot be. Okay, whatever. I mean, we don't even know what they are yet. So what is or is not possible is not known till we know. So everyone, please keep an open mind. You do not need qualifications to be a witness. You do have to be honest, rational, and have a true perspective on what you are seeing. And on the subject of perspective, is that not the thing on water that makes it very hard to determine not just size? Use this criteria. Go to the lock or any other cryptid zone with the idea of not trying to become part of its story, but for it to become part of your personal story. Then maybe Just maybe you will find satisfaction in trying to bring the creature and not yourself to the forefront, and in doing that, you may well become a long-term part of its story, its legend. So let's get back to trying to find out the true nature of Nessie. She has another trait. Yep, what appears to be basking. Indeed, yes. There are many accounts of that now legendary humpback just laying on the surface, not even moving for a long time. What on earth is shy Nessie doing? Maybe she is heating herself up on warm days, but she has also been seen doing this on inclement days. So is she just chilling? I think not. Maybe she is asleep. But that hump has seen unaffected by the water flow, and it has even moved against the water flow. Well, what do I think, you may be wondering? Well, my guess is obviously as good as anyone else's, but let's have a think. Okay. Here goes. Aesthetics. It's a trait of higher intels. I mean, is she not entitled just to enjoy lazing at the surface? It may well be the same reason she sometimes swims neck out of the water, maybe even a territorial display. And the heck knows who to. Let's look at that issue. So are there any instances of aggression being displayed? Well, if Nessie displays angst by blocking, then yes, a case of a military boat hitting an object mid-lock during the war, and an unusual wave in front of a speed attempt, resulting in death in the latter case. Coincidence? Maybe. But remember, Nessie is normally rather shy, and motorboats make plenty of noise. She could get out of the way. Now, I refer to her as she, but you know, even shy deer who will normally run away. The males, at a certain rutting time, will challenge most things, obviously including other large males. So, consider Nessie learnt by pain and injury to avoid boats. Does Nessie even have real aggression? Well, I have read of a case, and how true this account may be, who knows? But consider, nearly all accounts of cryptids are anecdotal. So some guy baits a barrel with meat and bull's blood and set it adrift. Guess what? Nothing happened. Then what? What else? He went away. Days later, someone made a report of two long-necked creatures in the loch fighting over the barrel. Now either someone was having the rest of us over a barrel, or Nessie is capable of aggression, or is territorial. So the barrel drifted and a dispute over ownership ensued. So what are these territories in Loch Ness? What are their favorite haunts? Where are the most sightings? Once again, I am going to back up. On the subject of waves, you know, orcas, yeah, them again, gang together and charge at a seal on an ice floe. They create a wave that shoves the seal into the water. So, how many types of whale thrash the water or tail slap? I am not suggesting it is the same type of animal, but one of the newest cryptids, that is, the Florida sea monster, has video of it doing the same thing. Does Nessie also thrash the waters? Witness reports from China, Japan and Lake Okanagan suggest these creatures do indeed do this. And if we take a look at the 1970s Unexplained series with Robert Stack presenting it, well, there is a slow motion section of a reddish-brown something. Yes, that something is thrashing the water out on the lake. They ran it in slow motion. What we see is a huge diamond-shaped paddle come out of the water and splash back in. At normal speed, it was not visible. So just maybe these lake unknowns also used the surface to splash about on. And maybe the much maligned witnesses who were accused of filming just waves were doing just that. But filming the waves caused by these creatures who possibly even use waves as camouflage. Unbelievable maybe. But who would believe orcas would line up and charge a seal to create a wave? And on the subject of reddish-brown objects, consider this. Back in the UK, when I was, about 21, maybe 22, I was watching the ITN news at 10 p.m. It was half-hour long, and at the end they would have a brief light-hearted bit of news. Okay, so this is what they showed. Somewhere in, I think, the Caribbean, or it could have been the Bahamas. Anyway, the seawater was clear blue. A man claimed he often would witness these two plesiosaur-like creatures basking on the surface while he was microlighting. But on this occasion he took a camera. We get to see exactly that. The newscaster, Reginald Bosanquet, points out that their backs break the surface periodically, but when the micro's shadow came over them, they went in an instant. So now I am going to describe to you from memory what I saw. I kid you not, their plan view was typical plesiosaur. 4 huge diamond-shaped paddles, front ones slightly larger than the rear. Long neck, but not elasmosaur like long, and they drooped their neck and head down like they were sleeping, and a short tail, reddish-brown, and while I will not divulge my true age, I will say this was probably 1980 or 1981, so you will realize, no CGI and no Photoshop, and in any case, the news would not have shown it if they thought it was fake. People were more incredulous in those days. Now, due to Photoshop and CGI, it's harder to prove things, as you may well know. So now let's talk about the so-called territories that I was going to tell you about. From the top, south side, Dawes, Inverfarry Gaig, bottom, Fort Augustus, Invermariston, Foyers River or the Leats Mouth, Urquhart Castle, and there's also Torpoint. You know, it may well be that one male or one female only occupies each area. Consider less inbreeding, maybe long lives, rarely breeding, and high mortality rates for the young. Based on the Kelly Chi photos and the observational work of Team Nessie on Nessie Cam, I think currently there are 2 juvenile Nessies swanning beneath, and sometimes on the surface of Loch Ness. Check out YouTube, Team Nessie. Once again, I am going to back up a bit. Now that's not a bad thing. Consider you really do want information. And of course, I urge you to also double-check things out for yourself and make up your own minds. In the end, someday, hopefully, we will find out what Nessie and indeed all the other lake creatures are about. That said, I feel sure each will reveal more and more of the work of God's great hands. The thing I want to clarify is this. Adrian Shine and others who examined the mud at the bed of the loch say there is not trace of sea salt. Okay, but did you know that even agitated 16 centimeters below and fresh water does not mix with salt water? Rains are fresh. You know, I could go through all the hoaxes, and actually I am going to do that. But with a difference, as you may expect, it's true. Hoaxers make it very difficult for the person who genuinely reports things, but hold fire before you start jeering inside in agreement. I mean, if these colorful plonkers did not bring Nessie into the mainstream and even help keep it alive as the most famous of cryptids, you would not be that interested. So let's just salute what I believe was a cultural colonial urge to be like bygone famous explorers of lore and legend. To hoaxers of the future, don't bother. The tech will show you up rather fast, like, stay home, open your laptop. Before I embark on a roll call of famous sightings and known hoaxes, and yes, I will also give my opinion on them. Hey, it's my vid, isn't it? Well then, firstly, would like to mention that like the Baudet film, that only a few eyes have allegedly seen. Well, you know, Loch Ness also has such a film stuck with lawyers. Whether it really exists even, who knows? So it's called the McRae film. Shot in the 60s, it has 2 different creatures featured. One at the sea loch, Duick, the other, Loch Ness, in the Great Orme of Loch Ness. Holiday interviewed a chap who claimed to have had a viewing, similar to each other, fluxing necks, slightly different manes. Yes, manes. If I remember well, both also had snail-like horns on their heads. Both had necks that seemed to be in a continuous flux. There is an on-land sighting at Whitefield by a couple driving by the loch in that era, but later, they said the neck shot across the road in a worm-like manner, sort of fluxing. So back to the film. The Loch Duick one had a tufted fibrous mane, and the neck was low over the water, and the Ness one had a more stranded fibrous mane, both approx 150 feet from the camera. That said, cameras were not like they are today. So, with mindless cam shake and dipsticks trying to look past viewfinders, it makes crappy footage, even with quality tech. Now you may be understanding why Holiday came to the conclusion of a mollusk. Well, in the film, the guy who claims he saw it said they seem to have a sheen on them, and Holiday alludes to the mucus that snails have. Maybe, whatever. Could well be right. It's my opinion that these and other unknown lake creatures will prove to be new phylum. You know, everyone tends to bend evidence or testimony to suit their theories. Have I? Well, I hope not.